received. We reached Aunt Libby 7 o'clock, had a lovely ride. This picture shows what they do to the bad people of Delaware, and it's signed Aunt Harriet. Sometimes when people come in here and they see these images, they are of course upset, and one of the ways they express it is they say to me, why don't you have any pretty items? Why don't you have any positive items? And I say to them, it's not that kind of museum. This museum is really a Black Holocaust museum. Pretty pictures don't belong in here. In the 1960s, a group of severely deformed people, I don't like using the term freaks, I think it's analogous to the term nigger, but a group of so-called freaks moved down to Florida. They had grown tired of being stared at. So they moved down, they cleared the land right outside of Sarasota, Florida. And right out in front of the town, after 3 years of building, they put a sign, and the sign had only 2 words, whites only. Now think about that. Here you have a group of people who've been discriminated against in a way that blacks can probably not understand. And I think to myself, well, they have the right to be ignorant also. They have the right to hold racist views. They were raised in the same society which produced you and I. Unfortunately, they weren't the only people to put up those signs. White laborers, track work. These don't survive, or didn't survive well, because they're put on cheap paper. It's just understood. You just write white laborers, no blacks applied. The Jim Crow Museum, we emphasize everyday items because we want to show how racism permeated our society. So the publisher, so the printer, so the producer manages to insult LBJ and to insult Black American women. In the 1960s, there was a lot of talk about the new Democrat and the new Negro. And of course, this license plate suggests that Lyndon Baines Johnson and his Democrats and Martin Luther King were just simply rats. All racial and ethnic groups in the United States have been caricatured. But when you say Africans and their American descendants, we find literally dozens of caricatures. And brand new caricatures have been created in recent years.
Shut up before I pet slap your behind.
Here we have a t-shirt which I purchased in Fort Myers, Florida in the 1990s. I bought it, ironically, from a first-generation American. This is a kind of brute hybrid mixed with a modern-day dope user image. One of the few items in this museum I've purchased from a black person, and I thought, that's about as racist a modern item as you could get away with. And he says to me, hey, I think this shirt's gonna look good on you. A young fella came to my house during Halloween wearing this. It's called the Plain Brown Wrapper. And I asked him where he purchased it, and he told me at the local mall, shopping mall. Look how menacing that looks. When I came home and put it on, I scared my daughter. I purchased this at an antique show, and it's not an antique, of course. The knife says, this orange should be juiced. And of course, OJ is the orange that is to be juiced. $20 I paid for this. What is black foreplay? Scream and I'll kill you. What is sickle cell anemia? AIDS for spades. Why don't blacks drive convertibles? Because their lips would flap them to death. Is that funny? This book was produced in 1984 and was part of a series of books numbering probably 8. Did you hear that the NFL is going to use green footballs next year? Did you ever hear of a black dropping a watermelon? Is that funny? Something can be funny and offensive.
That's why I praise that he turns out to be a vegetarian.
What's going on?
Those sure is some tasty cookies.
When you have a set of animals that are making animal noises, you get to the alligator and he's talking in black dialect.
Where does the association between blacks and watermelons come from? What we do know is that by the mid-1800s, blacks are being associated with watermelon and chicken. One theory is that it's a Southern phenomenon. What might have been a Southern stereotype became a black stereotype. Watermelon is good. It's good for you. And it's testimony to the strength and power of negative stereotypes that you have black Americans who won't eat watermelon. In the 1800s in vaudeville, the minstrel show was the single most popular form of entertainment in this country. Even until the 1900s, towns, small towns, large towns put on minstrel shows, oftentimes not meaning any harm, not meaning to degrade blacks, not meaning to put blacks down. They simply knew no better. So they blackened their faces and darkened the stages, if you excuse the pun, and they raised monies for charities, and they did it at the expense of black people. You don't have to be a psychologist to realize there is a great deal of self-loathing which comes from being racially brutalized. We have in the Jim Crow Museum material on the so-called tragic mulatto, near white blacks who unfortunately for them had been, quote, touched by the tar brush. The tragic in tragic mulatto was that they were so close and yet separated by a racial gulf. Look, in the 1960s, you have these movies with titles like I Passed for White. And the assumption, of course, always is that white is better. This is a decal. I don't think that having a Confederate flag makes you racist, but I know that the racist movement in our society has appropriated that flag. I bought these Klan business cards from a Klansman. I actually don't like any Klan material in the room because it dominates the room. People come in here, they say, "Where'd you get the Klan stuff?" I always say, the guy with the beer in his hand. I used to buy this book, $5 a copy at gun shows. McVeigh blows up a building, now it's $20. I think this is from the 1920s. Tell you what it reminds me of. Richard Pryor in a concert one time said he had gone to Africa with some white friends, and in the middle of the night he heard the natives beating on drums. And all his white friends got really concerned. And so they came and knocked on his door, and they said, "Richard, what are they saying?" I think Richard Pryor was born in Peoria. Would he know what they were saying? So what he did to have a laugh, he said, "Wait a minute, let me listen." And the drums kept beating. And he turned to his white friends and he said, "You guys in trouble." That's a silly story. When people come in here, of course, we talk about race. And one of the things that I found with, especially many of the white visitors who come in here, is that they have this question in their head, and the question is, how long are we going to be talking about race? How long? And that question presupposes that one day we'll stop talking about race. And I try to tell people this: we will never, ever stop talking about race. We will never stop talking about relations between men and women, between parents and children, between gays and straight. There's some things we're always going to be talking about. The trick is not to stop talking about race. The trick is to talk about it better, to talk about it differently. And that's what I hope this room does. Create a new set of questions. So we say to ourselves, well, you know, there is a historical continuum of anti-black material items. They continue to this day. What can we do today? Thank you. These are not real black people. These are distortions, exaggerations, caricatures. They are lies.